Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. On today's episode, Rose Matthews joins us to discuss research that they're working on, which includes an autistic menopause study, transitioning to retirement, and how we as autistics navigate the end of our lives. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Rose, thanks so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure, Doug. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. I wanted to start off by just kind of learning about your story and where does your story specifically in the autistic community begin?
Well, to be honest, Doug, it might have begun around 1989 was when I first looked up what autism was, how you might tell if a child was autistic. I had had my first child, and I noticed that my child had more significant distress than other children seem to experience, and about some quite specific things. And autism was one of the things that came into my mind. I thought, I just wonder. So I did go away and look it up. But back then, there was very, very little information available. And because my child didn't have any developmental delay, was hitting all the milestones, spoke early, no language issues, on the contrary, a very advanced language skills, it just didn't fit with what I was reading. So I let that go. And in the course of my career, so, I mean, I've done lots of different jobs, public sector type jobs, police, probation, social work, mental health, learning disability. So obviously in the course of my career, I learned about autism, and I actually ended up in a job which was setting up a pilot befriending scheme where autistic people were matched with people who shared common interests, to kind of go out and explore different activities that they like to do together, either in the community or at home. And, even then it was strange because I spent a day with somebody who was autistic doing a fundraising event. And at the end, when I was driving her home, she said, "You do know you're one of us, don't you, Rose?" And I said, "Well, the thing about me is I'm kind of like, wherever I am, I'm kind of very chameleon-like. So if I'm in France, I speak with a French accent, even if I'm speaking English. And, like I adapt to my surroundings. When I was a social worker, I was my natural kind of hippie self with shawls and beads and things. But then when I joined the police, I went out and bought a very smart blue shirtwaist dress that I thought would be just the kind of dress that a would-be police officer would wear. So I've always been kind of flexing and adapting and chameleoning. It just seemed to me that when somebody suggested I was autistic, it was because I was working in an environment with autistic people, and therefore I just adapted. And of course, Doug, what I now realize was happening was that in that environment, I actually started to let go of all the layers of pretending not to be autistic that I'd acquired, because I could have loads of stimmy toys on my desk and I could do all of these things. And so I could have got there a bit sooner than I did. And for me, the real revelation came in 2018 in the summer. And a wonderful former colleague of mine emailed me about some things. And we had a bit of an email exchange. And then she sent me this message. And I'll never forget, because that thing you get when you read something and you kind of physically feel like your heart almost skips. And I was reading this email and she was saying, "Oh, and things have moved on since we last worked together, and I've been to see a counsellor and one thing and another, and guess what? I've just been diagnosed. I'm autistic." And I just had this moment because I thought, oh my goodness, because we were so similar. We had the same struggles with the same employer. We used to share our struggles. And I thought, well, if they're autistic, then perhaps maybe I am. It kind of set me off down a road of thinking, I hardly dared hope it, actually. Do you know what? I hardly dared hope it, because I'd looked for answers for so long and never really found the answer, and always ruled out autism because of the lack of really good information. And when I finally thought there was a hope of an answer, I was just like, I daren't even believe this. But in the course of trying to get assessed, I just had to bypass the medical system. I mean, there was no way I could persuade them that I was autistic. They'd throw things back at me like I'd had a fairly successful career, I was married, I'd had children, I'd had long relationships, I was managing to live independently. They didn't see or seem to believe the real struggles that I'd had. And even the fact that 2 years before I eventually got assessed for autism, after a meltdown, which I then didn't know was a meltdown, I got detained by the police and held in a police cell overnight. Now, that's a fairly extreme thing to happen to somebody who face appearance is just an ordinary person going about their business, running a charity. And I went to my doctor then and said, how on earth can this be explained? There has to be something happening here. And they just didn't grasp it. So eventually I had an autism assessment in the fall of 2018. And it was just, it's been 5 years of a lot of soul searching, a lot of regret at times, a lot of happiness and self-acceptance, self-compassion, a lot of changes in my day-to-day life. But it wasn't really the so-called experts who diagnosed me as autistic. It was when I joined an online community and I was hanging out online with people, and we were able to share passions for things. Like I have a passion for old washing machines and watching videos of old washing machines and things like that. And just like meeting people who had the same kind of niche interests that I did absolutely convinced me I was autistic. So that if I'd have gone into the experts and they'd said you're not, I just would have thought, well, your assessment process clearly is flawed, because I am. So, although there's a date in November when I was told by a psychologist that I was autistic, and although there's a date in January when I got a written report, it was between August and October that I realised, and it's changed my life exponentially, and I'll be forever grateful for that.
Sounds like you've done a lot of different things in terms of employment in your life, but currently you work at Involve Northeast, which is a nonprofit who brings to the table voices of those who healthcare services are designing services by the community for the community, which I think is so critical. What kind of voices do you think are critical to bring to the table, or that you have brought to the table there, that are really essential for designing these services, when we know the medical model clearly still has a long way to go in understanding the autistic experience, especially of those of us who are adults?
Well, the organisation that I'm working for at the moment, I work there part-time. It's one thread in a kind of multifaceted sort of career portfolio that I have at the moment. But I'm really enjoying it. And I kind of fell in love with the job during the interview. So I'm so glad that I got this opportunity to work there, because it allows me to draw on sort of previous experience, as you say, working across public third sector, working in lots of different services and seeing how systems join up and who gets included and who gets left out. And you know what? The really sad thing that I noticed earlier in my career was that it's a bit like sometimes if you envisage a giant pinball machine, as a person trying to access health and social care services here in the UK and in other places around the world, you can actually get ricocheted from one service to the other. You get rejected from a mental health service because they say, hey, you're autistic. We don't have mental health expertise in working with autistic people. Well, hey, why not? because autistic people are far more likely to have mental health issues as a result of living in a world that's not accommodated for our needs. So, you get bounced around, bounced around, bounced around. And what I saw a lot earlier in my career was people being pushed and shoved and excluded and then ending up in criminal justice, in prison, where there shouldn't be lots and lots of neurodivergent people in prisons who shouldn't be there, but it's because services haven't supported them, given them the right kind of supports and the right kind of treatments earlier. With Involve Northeast, at the moment, we're working on a really big project with the local health system, and that's looking at urgent care. We're looking at how people use urgent care, where they can access urgent care. And a particular priority there is underserved communities, underserved groups of people who are not currently accessing those services. So although part of the work is designed to make sure that services aren't used inappropriately, it's really, really important that people who aren't currently using them get to know about them and that those services are made accessible. And I'm a huge fan, I'm sure you know it, the work by Autistic Doctors International, Mary Doherty, Seb Shaw and colleagues. I mean, what a phenomenal job they're doing of raising awareness of how systems and services can be made accessible. And it's often not rocket science. It's very, very simple adjustments that can make a phenomenal difference. I'm loving my work with Involve Northeast, and it relates really well to the other work that I do at the moment, which is research studies and research projects.
New things scare me, but at the same time, I know they're essential for my life and they've helped me to grow in so many different ways as an adult. So when I read where you said, I do what I love and I love what I do, which is often discovering something new, I wanted to talk to you about this. So, what have you seen that might be the impact on your life as well as others when they aren't maybe constantly discovering, or maybe not constant, but consistently discovering these new things in their lives?
Well, I can only talk about what works for me because I think we're all very different. And I once lived with somebody who owned a field, and that field had a rut going around the edge of it. Is rut a word that you use? It means like a groove
Yeah,
going around.
yeah.
Because they walked that field every morning and evening and had actually worn this hollow ridge. And I remember thinking that I found that quite scary because I have quite a high desire for novelty and change and difference. And that was one of the things that made me think that I couldn't be autistic, because I didn't think that that was compatible with being autistic. I thought that if I was autistic, I'd have far more of a drive towards sameness. But it's interesting, because in many respects, I do a lot of things that are very much the same. I wear the same clothes. I like to eat the same foods. And it seems that if I have a core of sameness, then around that core of sameness, then I can kind of enjoy novelty. And I think one of the reasons I enjoy novelty is, like, when you do research, the exciting thing for me about research is you don't know, well, in good research, you don't know what you're going to find. So research shouldn't be, although it sometimes is, people sort of saying, okay, so this is our hypothesis and now we want to prove it. Much more exciting to me is going in with a very open mind and thinking, let's just see what the data are telling us. Let's just see what's really happening here. I enjoy that aspect of my work of finding out new things and pushing the boundaries of knowledge. So if we already know something on a subject, how can we expand that knowledge? How can we build on it? And can we find aspects, especially of the autistic adult lived experience, that nobody has done any work on whatsoever? And can we actually start to find out some things about that? Because what is so shocking, and I know you won't be shocked by this, but what is so shocking is that there are whole areas of our lives that virtually nothing is known about. How can that be? So many autistic adults and so little work done.
And, I think that's one of the reasons I was really excited to talk to you, because you've been doing research for a long time now, and you're doing research in areas that have gotten no attention whatsoever for our autistic experience, or very little at all. And one of those areas in our experience as autistic people is dealing with menopause. And I know you're done a study on that recently. I know it's in the process right now. The first two phases, I believe, are closed. What's been your experience in this study up to this point?
Well, it's been fantastic. It's a Canada UK research team. We're a mixed neurodivergent and non-neurodivergent team. And it's been wonderful because it builds on work that two of our team had done previously. So Rachel Mosley and Julie Turner Cobb had written two papers, which some of the people listening to this may be familiar with. So they wrote two papers from a study about autistic people's experience of menopause. A qualitative study, quite small numbers of people. And what we've done with the Canada UK study is the first phase was to work with focus groups of autistic people with experience of menopause and also some individual interviews to actually find out from them how they thought we should go about doing an international survey, what questions we should ask, how we should ask them, how we should structure and design the survey, what practical aspects of completing a survey we should take into account. So this was really exciting because, co-production gets spoken about a lot, but it doesn't always happen in the sense of involving people in the actual design of how the research is going to be done. And Christine Jenkins and I, respectively, we're the Canada and UK Community Research Associates on the project. And so we work with the academics, but we have our own lived experience, but obviously that's just our particular lived experience. And then there's the information we have through our contacts and associates. But the first phase of the study was really, really important and in helping us to design phase 3, the survey, which has also now closed, and we're analysing the data from that. And I think the middle part of the kind of sandwich, because the two parts 1 and 3 are traditional in that one's focus group and interview, and the third part is an international survey, which everybody would be familiar with that methodology. But in the middle of the sandwich was this innovative idea of inviting people to submit creative works, drawings, paintings, pieces of dance, or whatever, however they wish to express their experience of being autistic and experiencing menopause. And we got some fabulous submissions. And then in order to respond to those and to think how to respond as researchers, we decided that Christine and I would respond creatively. So we considered the works, lived with the works, looked at the works, read the works, and then we kind of journaled our responses, and Christine drew on her musical background and interested in song lyrics, and I got my pens out and started drawing and writing some poetry. Christine wrote a poem as well. So we've got a body of creative work which expresses the lived experience of autistic menopause. And I'm really, really excited about that because sometimes it's difficult to express oneself in traditional ways. And research can sometimes feel like we're sucking all the individuality out of something and ending up with just data. Whereas this is very much alive. And I can highly recommend that people take a look at the creative works. They're on the Autistic Menopause website now. So it's www.autisticmenopause.com. And there's a section on the website which is creative submissions. So you can look at the works. And then once the paper that we're writing is published, you'll be able to see how Christine and I responded as well. But it's had a spin-off already in that I'm doing a workshop at Flushfest, the Menopause Festival, in September.
Something I am thinking more and more about these days, even though I'm not quite there yet, is retirement. And you've done what sounds like some recent research on autistic people's experiences to the transition of retirement. So, what might be some principles that you'll think about when you decide that that transition is going to be a permanent one for you into retirement?
Well, do you know what, Doug? I think one of the fascinating things about doing research is how it affects you as a researcher, particularly if you're an autistic researcher researching autism specific topics. So, as a direct result of being involved in interviewing autistic people who'd either retired in the last few years or were planning to retire, I found myself going out into my local community and scoping out the kinds of things that I might do when I begin to reduce my working hours. Because it struck me that I didn't want to leave it until I suddenly have space in my schedule because that is going to be a scary prospect. At the moment, I have a number of different strands of work that fill up my calendar really nicely with enough space to walk my two lovely dogs and enough space just to allow me to put in place really good self care. Because I suppose one of the things that I've done since 2018 is to be much more careful about overwork. I used to be somebody who would overwork a lot, and now I've realized what a potentially dangerous thing it is to do. So I have no wish to go into burnout again. One of the things that I suppose I'm doing now is that I'm trying to envisage a life beyond work, but I'm also trying to find types of work that are kind of retirement proof, if you know what I mean, because it occurs to me that most of my successful relationships have been through people I work with. I enjoy being task focused rather than going to meet up in a cafe and talk about, I don't know, holidays or clothes or shoes or I would much prefer to meet somebody in a cafe and have a conversation about some philosophical aspect of being autistic or an underexplored research area. I kind of have this ambition to work forever, but to work in ways that are not unduly demanding or stressful, but are kind of rewarding and fun. My own sort of retirement plan, and I have to say I've been in and out of semi-retirement for the last few years, so I keep kind of semi-retiring and then getting sucked back into working more or less full-time by really interesting opportunity. My plan is to, as I get into, I'm young old at the moment, apparently I looked it up this morning, so technically I'm young old at the age of 63, 64. But when I get into my late 60s and I'm older, old, then I'm thinking about working slightly less and doing more non work type things. But you know what? I have this sneaky feeling that the non work things are going to turn into a kind of work because, because that just seems to be how I am. But I think that another thing to mention is I've got another piece of work that I'm really interested in. I don't know whether it's okay to segue across into talking about death, dying, and bereavement. So at the moment, I'm in a relationship and I'm married to my best friend. I live with my best friend. I don't really have any other friends as such. I have adult children, I have a grandchild, I have parents and siblings, but I've never really had friends. And it suddenly occurred to me that if I were to outlive my partner, if my partner were to die before me, I would suddenly find myself in a situation where I would be on my own. I've lived alone for quite significant periods of time in my life, but not for a while now. I've been married quite a few years. And I was thinking, I need to start relearning what it's like to do things independently and on my own. We live quite separate lives and quite independent lives, but I think I need to sort of practice what it would be like if I didn't have that person, going out there, getting to meet a few people, and that kind of thing. So I've started to work on those sorts of things. And what I've learned from interviewing other autistic people has definitely affected me because one of the questions that we asked was, what would your advice be to other autistic people planning for retirement? And the obvious things about financial preparedness and everything else, but what a lot of people, I think, forget about, I found myself thinking about is all the other parts of life, you know, how to plan for those, not a pension pot, not a financial thing, what else? What else am I going to plan for? So that's where I'm at. And I have to say, that study, I can't wait for that to get published, because it's the only study that we found, apart from one study of one person, so a single person case study of a retired autistic man done some time ago. We haven't been able to find any other studies about autistic people's experiences of retirement. Isn't that a surprise? It kind of assumes that we don't work and have careers, and it's such an odd thing, isn't it? Really.
I also wonder, knowing that our life expectancies are shorter, and then just also the understanding about autism. Like when I first learned about autism, I think it was like 1997 and 98, and there was, and I wouldn't even consider myself to be autistic then, because the information out there was just so lacking. Could not even relate to my own experience. So I'm just wondering how some of those things play into why there's so, well, there's almost non-existent, right? Essentially, non-existent research out there.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, I mean, it's to do with the failure to recognize people who were autistic, what some people call the lost generations of people. My
Mm-hmm.
parents' generation, my great grandparents and beyond, I mean, once you know you're autistic, do you find this? You can trace it right through your family, the rather idiosyncratic great grandmother who people spoke about. And you think all the family stories that are told suddenly make sense. Well, of course, that the grandfather who had bad nerves during the Second World War and had to go off to a nursing home for his nerves, put an autistic person in the Blitz in the docks, and I think, going back to life expectancy, I just wanted to say something about that. I mean, being 63, nearly 64, reading those statistics about life expectancy could be extremely scary. Like, I might go to bed every night and think, I'm going to wake up in the morning. And all I would say about that is, I'm not saying that there's no truth in them. There is. I mean, we know that autistic people have poor outcomes because of lack of availability and accessibility of health systems and services. We content warning suicide. So I'm the survivor of bereavement by suicide. I've got a passionate interest in better research on suicide. And I think that obviously some of the mortality statistic is explained by suicide, but not all. Even if you factor that out, there's still issues around early mortality. But what I would say is, you've got to remember that there are undiagnosed autistic people as well who are living to an advanced age. And, I come from a very long-lived family who mostly have lived into their 90s, nearly 100, some of them, late 80s. And I think a significant number of my older relatives were autistic. So I think that the problem with mortality statistics is that we don't yet have kind of complete data, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I sometimes worry because sometimes those statistics are used as scare statistics. And I just think you have to be quite mindful of how people are actually reacting to those. Like, to think that, and also, I mean, I think the other important thing is around intersectionality, because some groups of people experience much worse mortality and health outcomes than others. So if you're a privileged white male in an affluent part of the UK, you might live on average, 10 years longer than somebody who lives in the northeast, where I live in a socioeconomically deprived part of the country, and our life expectancies are less. So you've got to factor in all of these things. But I just think it's really important that people don't think it's kind of deterministic and that I will die young because I'm autistic. I think, to me, it was a wake-up call to try and insist on getting good health care and not to be fobbed off by doctors. I'm still struggling on that front, because I think that even if you know you're autistic and you advocate for your own health rights, there's a lot of resistance to actually accepting that. So I go to my GP saying, look at the statistics around these health conditions for autistic people. Because I have interoceptive issues, I don't actually pick up on a lot of things that are going on in my body. So I can get quite ill before I know that I'm ill. And I've asked for screening tests to exclude the possibility of some conditions and been told no. And I think that's really unacceptable. So I'm hoping that we've got some health checks being piloted here in the UK at the moment for autistic people. And I'm hoping that they get introduced more widely. It would be the option of having a kind of health checkup annually and having various tests run just to exclude some treatable conditions. And I would really love that. And I would really like it now. But as with everything, we have to wait until it's all been piloted and tested and implemented. And being my age, I'm quite impatient. I think that's the other thing. Being in your 60s, it makes you really impatient to get stuff done, like now, for older autistic people, because we're living our lives now. And there's a lot of older autistic people who are living in really dire circumstances, in poverty, and without access to good supports. And, we want something doing about it now, not in 10 years' time. I'm one of the fortunate ones. I have quite a comfortable life, but unfortunately, that isn't the case for a lot of older autistic people. And I think they're a group who tend to get neglected and forgotten about. There's a lot of ageism around. And if you're, say, Black and older and autistic and bi, you've got all these multiple layers of discrimination and prejudice coming at you. So we've really got to kind of, going back to the start of our conversation, we've got to look at who's getting excluded, who's getting a place at the table to design services, who's getting into leadership positions, who's running services, who's running the country. We need more neurodivergent people in politics, but we won't be able to do that until they reform the way that UK politics happens, because all the shouting and screaming in the House of Commons, I mean, I wouldn't stand to be in there for more than 10 minutes.
So I'm wondering about, have a place at the table. I'm wondering about that in terms of areas of research for autistic people that have not been covered, in the sense that non-autistic researchers not even thinking about these areas. I know we're making progress with autistic researchers doing a lot of this great work, but where do you kind of see that and where we are as a factor in this research not being done up to this point?
Well, it's a huge factor, because on the very, very rare occasions when autistic people have been asked what matters to them, what they would like to be researched, they give such intelligent answers. And, just give them the money.
Get out of the way, right?
And, let them employ some non-autistic research assistants. No, actually, I'm being provocative. I have to say, I do work with non-autistic researchers, and some of them are extremely good and really good allies and very tuned into what autistic and neurodivergent people want. And so it's not all bad. But going back to, the tantalizing thing that I can't tell you about the findings of our research studies. So I'll just get this one off my chest, because it's a bit of a preoccupation at the moment. So there's this thing whereby, we do this academic research, which is all exciting, and we come up with the findings. And then we write papers so that we could get that information out to people. And we could do that in many different ways. So it doesn't just have to be an academic journal article, but it could be an animation, a film, a podcast, all kinds of different ways. We could go and talk, we can do all kinds of things, but we can't get the findings out there until papers have been peer reviewed and published. And there's a really long wait for that to happen. And again, being 63 and impatient, it's like, this is such a long wait, and I'd really like to fix that. And I think that if autistic people were after throwing the whole system, we would have fixed it by now, because it is basically a systems problem of the flow of work from one place to another, and how that happens. Because, I know that with the studies that we've done recently, people are really, really keen to know, well, what did you find out? Tell us what you found out. But we have to wait for the peer review process in order for the findings to have academic credibility. And then as soon as we can, we'll be releasing them in other formats and working with people to share them as widely as possible. But while we're on the subject of how to access research findings, can I just give a plug for my colleague Rachel Mosley's website that she set up? Because for anybody interested in research on mental health, suicidality, menopause, neurodivergence, she's done the most wonderful website. Not only has she uploaded her academic papers, she's done kind of little voiceovers of them, and so she's like made it really accessible, so you can get them in kind of different versions of things. You can get them in a more accessible format. I just think it's fabulous. And the website to look for is scienceonthespectrum.net. So it's Dr. Rachel Mosley's website. And I already plugged the autistic menopause website, so again, that's also got resources on it. As soon as we've got the new findings about autistic and neurodivergent menopause, then they'll obviously go up onto both of those websites. So do keep an eye out there. And we're hanging on Twitter, although not X, not posting. Are you still on Twitter X thing, Doug?
I still have an account there, but I don't know.
Do you?
Yeah, but not too active anymore. No.
Well, feel for me, because my main passion since 2009 has been Twitter. Like, I didn't think I really qualified as having, quotes, dreadful term, special interest. But then actually my autism assessment, I spent half an hour talking about Twitter. Feel for me, because I have actually been through a mourning, grieving process with what's been happening to Twitter. I mean that quite seriously.
So am I allowed to say the new name to you, or is that a traumatic?
Yeah, no, I've kind of got over that. I mean, I still scroll straight past the icon on my phone because I just don't recognize it. It hasn't yet imprinted itself up here, so I just ignore that. I think I've lost the bird, and oh no, but I am actually trying to wean myself off of Twitter and onto LinkedIn. And I have to say that I'm actually quite enjoying being on LinkedIn. And I feel this is a good example of me, right? So I didn't eat cheese until I was probably about 12, because I tried cheese when I was 5 and I didn't like it. And then when I was about 12 or so, or 11 or 12, for some reason, I just thought, oh, maybe I'll just try a little bit of cheese. And I discovered that I loved it. And I'm thinking, so how many years between when I was 5 and 11 or 12 did I actually like cheese? So now, even if I think I don't like something, every now and again I'll try it just to see if I do suddenly like it. And LinkedIn is one of those things, because I actually said on a podcast that I hated LinkedIn with a passion. And I thought they might ban me. But now, I just did a post on LinkedIn today about sorting out my wardrobe. And I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that kind of thing, because I kind of think most people are on there doing serious work stuff. But I'm just basically treating LinkedIn like a cross between LinkedIn and Twitter now, and just putting the random stuff that I would have put on Twitter over onto LinkedIn.
Well, I'm glad that you don't hate LinkedIn anymore.
I don't.
I enjoy that. I've enjoyed that platform. I think there's a great autistic community on LinkedIn. Rose, I really appreciated your time today. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us, and really appreciated it.
It's been a pleasure, Doug, and thank you so much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks so much to Rose for the conversation. To learn more about Rose, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. Here at Autism Personal Coach, our clients are the experts, our coaches are the guides. The majority of supports for autistics are not helpful. They try to fix us, not support us. That's why many are confused when we say our clients are the experts of their lived experience. Our clients are the experts for what's worked for them and about the things that they need and want in their lives. Our coaches first listen to our clients, then ask thoughtful questions, offer resources, and strategize with our clients so they can get what they need to thrive. Would you want a guide in your life to coach you to get the things you desire? If so, then visit autismpersonalcoach.com for more information. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism Stories, and if you did, if you could tell a friend, foe, or anyone you know about it so they could have the same enjoyable and educational experience as you when listening to Autism Stories, it would be very much appreciated. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.